We are live from the Gov 2.0 Expo in Washington, D.C., and I'm joined this afternoon by Pat McCormick, Manager, Digital Engagement, Department of Justice, Victoria, Australia. I know I missed something in there, right?
I'm in the Strategic Communication branch in the Department of Justice.
Great, okay. Yeah. So first question I have for you. Now, Australia has a history of open data, correct?
Well, I wouldn't really describe it that way.
Okay.
One thing, and I've lived in Australia about 4 years, married an Australian. I'm American, as you can tell from my accent, worked in the American government and the IT industry. So I'd say one thing that's really quite different is the government has copyright on data and information. It's called Crown copyright, and that's a legacy of the British system.
I see.
So just as we've seen recently in the UK, Australia's been tackling that issue as well as the ones we've tackled here in terms of releasing data.
Okay. So are there lessons learned or things that, as the U.S. starts progressing down open data avenues and the Gov 2.0 avenues, are there things that the U.S. should be paying attention to that Australia has already done?
Yeah, look, I think Australia has done some things particularly well. I think the other thing is that it's great to be able to look at a handful of examples to understand best practice. So, for example, I think now that we've seen quite a bit of progress in the U.S., UK, and Australia, each with a different approach, there are some particular strengths. One thing that Australia, and to some extent we see this in the UK, I think does particularly well is they do a lot of thinking about things. They address things at a policy level very carefully. So, for example, as was discussed in the panel that I was on by Dr. Nicholas Gruen, there was an inquiry, a report done by this Government 2.0 task force. So that was quite a bit of thinking at the federal level. In Victoria, we've also done some reports and work. There was a parliamentary inquiry on access to public sector information. And that was June of last year. And early this year, there was a response from the Victorian government that, in fact, was very positive in terms of many of the recommendations that we should release data more often and in better formats.
Okay. So you're in the Department of Justice, correct?
Yes.
So how does the Department of Justice use social media?
Okay, and I might also add that, look, you know, a lot of what I'm talking about are my own views, so I'm not officially representing the Department of Justice, but look, we've had a very I don't want to say experimental, but open approach to trying social media in areas where there are already efforts with traditional media. So, for example, Justice works a lot around campaigns to try to stop bad things from happening before they do. So, say problem drinking and alcohol-related violence, particularly among young guys, for example, or problem gambling. And in these cases, what we also we have a lot of work around emergency services. And as you might have heard, we had terrible bushfires just over a year ago in Australia and lost many lives in Victoria. So these are all traditional areas for justice where we see opportunities in social media. Some of it is about going to where the people are. If we're not reaching them in the press, we're not reaching them on our websites. In some cases, we will have a page on Facebook to talk about our emergency services volunteers. We'll have a campaign that utilizes YouTube to try and engage young people about how to watch out for their friends in drinking to avoid violence and that sort of thing. Just a couple of examples.
So are there unique data issues in the Justice Department? Are there things, and I'm thinking, you know, because the stakes are higher. You're dealing with life and death, important emergency management issues. Does that change the way that you can think about data?
Look, I think it does on a couple levels. One is that there are issues around privacy, security, that sort of thing that need to be addressed. And as you say, in terms of outcomes and how we engage with the community, many of the issues are around life and death. So, for example, we released an iPhone app earlier this year That's something where people can see if there are any bushfires near them, if there are any warnings, and they can use it to check to see if they're prepared for a bushfire. Now, we're not saying that tool changes everything, and we have to be very careful about how we talk about it. It's really, there are some new tools to supplement what we do and a new platform.
Okay. You mentioned privacy as well. Getting back to that with the data component, what are the considerations that you have to run into as you're developing a social media campaign? I mean, do you have to seriously consider what types of information is being put out there, the type of feedback loops that are incorporated? Is it a higher privacy threshold than it would be for, say, a business that's not in a life and death sort of scenario?
Yeah. Often, I would say, using the 80-20 rule, often it isn't, because a lot of what we're communicating to people doesn't involve personal information. Now, what's different is if you're on Facebook and engaging with people, what are the social norms that are emerging? And I think it's very important to balance a voice of authority and that you are government, and that people have a way to determine that you are, in fact, government, with a little bit of authenticity and personalization, sometimes even a little bit of humor. So, one example within the broad justice portfolio is our Victoria Police Department. They've done a really good job, I think, with Twitter, and that they are sending out tweets to say, look, we've got a what's called in Australia drink driving. We've got a bus. We're busting people at this intersection. As a matter of fact, we just busted 12 people. So in doing that, they're hoping there's some kids at clubs, they see the Twitter feed, and they leave the keys, they leave the car,
right,
and they don't drive. And what they've done is, like I said, they've been really clever about even being a little bit funny about that.
Sure.
But at the same time, being clear, we are the Victoria Police, and this is what we're doing out there.
Interesting. So it sounds like that's a different type of voice than what we've seen otherwise.
Yeah, I think that's right.
That's interesting.
And of course the other thing with social media is government is so used to being filtered through traditional media. And in this case, you're able to speak directly to people.
Right.
And so that offers a new opportunity for an authentic voice. But, I think it's you have to walk before you can run.
Well, great. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
That is it today for our live interviews. We will be back here at 6 p.m. for our end-of-day wrap-up hosted by Alex Howard. Please join us then.